Hi, this video today is going to be discussing how to understand the academic essay. The topics covered in the video are formatting thesis statements, writing introductions and conclusions, writing paragraphs, quote integration, in-text citations, signal phrases, works cited list, and revising. I want to preface this presentation with a quote from Pablo Picasso, who said, "Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist." So some of the things I'll be discussing today might seem very rules driven, but I just want to make you aware of the different resources that are valued in academic writing so you can get to more important things like making an interesting argument. So formatting is important because it is a way for people in the same field to have a consistent format. It's also important, it shows your professor as well that you pay attention to details, that if you're getting these small details um, correctly, then probably you have paid attention to other parts of your paper as well. We're going to be using MLA format, which uses 12-point Times New Roman font with 1-inch margins, double spacing throughout. I'm going to briefly show you how to format your paper. So once you pull up a Microsoft Word document, this is also very similar in Google Docs. You're going to want, first of all, to have Times New Roman font. You want 1-inch margins on both sides. Also, you can go to select all, paragraphing, make sure that you have double spacing. And then you're just going to put your name, I'll say Jane Smith, your professor, the course, and the date. You'll also want to go to insert page number at the top right and go to view header and put your last name in the header, flush right. Lastly, you're going to want an original title for your paper where the major words are capitalized. I'll just say the role of silence in scholarship boy, and that should be centered. You will then start your paper on the next line and just always indent the first paragraph and keep double spacing throughout. Next, I want to go to thesis statements. The thesis statement is the roadmap for your paper. A thesis consists of a claim and then a reason, usually connected by a word such as because or in order to. Your thesis statement boils down your argument into one clear, arguable, debatable statement. It's the conclusion you want your reader to come to after they read your paper. It's the conclusion you want to persuade your readers of. So here's some examples of some thesis statements. These are strong, but they still need a little bit of development. And then I will show you thesis statements that are stronger. Through the use of contrast, one can see the tensions that Rodriguez faces between education and culture and how he navigated through the two. So although it names some of the contrast, it doesn't specifically say what those tensions are or how Rodriguez navigated them. It's also more of a summary than a claim, an actual argument with a reason. Secondly, Rodriguez faced many challenges throughout the essay, such as being embarrassed of his parents and choosing school over his culture. So this thesis doesn't really say how those challenges affected him. It's just sort of summarizing some of the challenges, but not really arguing about the role of these challenges and how they affected him. Third, the internal conflict that Rodriguez faces between becoming a successful scholar and staying connected with his family changes who he is and adds tensions to his life. This is getting a lot stronger. We're identifying specific tensions, but we're not really talking about the role of identity here or actually how these tensions specifically changed him. You want to be as explicit as possible here. Here's some stronger thesis statements. While trying to balance home and school life, Rodriguez sacrifices his working-class native intelligence for academic knowledge. This is a very explicit thesis. We have some interesting key terms such as native intelligence and academic knowledge, and we know exactly what the paper will be about. Secondly, the resentment Rodriguez expresses towards his parents contradicts the man he wants to appear to be, an intelligent and well-composed scholar. This is also a really intriguing thesis as well. Rodriguez's use of contrast primarily reveals one major contrast, Rodriguez versus himself. This is another just really interesting argument that would be, it makes you want to read the paper, this notion of Rodriguez versus himself. And finally, Rodriguez uses the metaphor of silence to symbolize the separation he feels between his home and school life. This is getting to a really interesting, arguable thesis, operationalizing this concept of the metaphor of silence and saying that it symbolizes separation. This is really what you want to be working up towards, this type of arguable thesis. You could also make an argument that silence represents something else, so you always want your argument to be debatable. Next, I want to move to introductions. Introductions, they preview and provide background context for your argument. They transport the reader from their lives, their place of analysis into your place of into their lives into your place of analysis. You always want to begin with a meaningful introductory sentence, but a lot of times with attention grabbers, you also want to avoid generalities that don't relate specifically to the argument at hand. For instance, everyone in life has good and bad experiences. This doesn't say anything. It's not related to the actual argument you will be making. So whatever you're doing, connect the introduction to the specifics of your argument. You also want to avoid long quotations. You can save them as evidence for the body of the paper. And at least in this course, include the thesis as the last sentence of your introduction. Always underline it. This is just so you know, and the reader knows that you do have a thesis, you have an argument that you can structure your paper around. So effective introductions establish context, they provide background, they discuss the importance of the issue, they indicate an issue, problem, or controversy in the field you're working in. They provide a bit of background information and define the topic in key terms. They state the purpose of the essay, and they provide a nice overview and structure, and they frame the essay. So next I want to move to paragraphs. Paragraphs are the reasons of support for your thesis. You will only have one topic per paragraph. If you move to a new topic, start a new paragraph. Generally, paragraphs are at least 5 to 7 well-developed sentences. It will take a little while for you to be able to elaborate in your writing to get to 5 to 7 sentences, but that's what we want to be working towards. You also don't want super long paragraphs that are over a page. Those should be broken up most likely. And then towards the end of your paragraph, you want to transition. Try to transition to the next paragraph, the next topic, so your paper is cohesive and flows together. Here is a paragraph model. It's kind of like the quote burger, if some people have seen that. This is just kind of a little more of a complex version of that. Each of these parts of the paragraph model are various phases in the paragraph. So it's not a certain amount of sentences for each phase. It's whatever gets the job done. So the first thing you want to do is a clear topic sentence, the claim of your paragraph. That you want a clear topic sentence that provides the topic of your paragraph. Next, you want to provide a little orientation or context for your evidence that will be coming up. So establish some context in a few sentences for that topic. Then you can move into evidence. This is providing evidence from the text in support of your topic. Then you want to actually interpret that quote or evidence. What does that quote actually mean? Tell what the author is showing, okay? Interpret it for the reader, spell it out. Finally, you want to evaluate the quote for its significance. You want to analyze the significance of it and explain how this evidence supports your argument, okay? Quote integration. You always want your quotes integrated into an existing sentence. Include appropriately cited quotes from the text as evidence in each body paragraph. More than likely, you will need to include evidence from a text in each paragraph to support your argument. Always integrate quotes into a sentence. Don't leave a quote by itself. Generally, do not begin or end a paragraph with a quote. If you begin a paragraph with a quote, then you won't have a topic sentence, so the reader won't know what topic you're talking about. If you end a paragraph with a quote, you will have not interpreted or analyzed the significance of that evidence. You can provide so you want to provide context before and after the quote. Um, I discourage using block quotes of more than 4 lines. You would have to then look at MLA format and do it in block quote formatting. But really, if you have long quotes, you can also just paraphrase or just quote a portion. We're really looking more for your original analysis rather than just long passages from the text copied into the paper. So there are several different ways to integrate a quote. I'm going to show you 4 different ways to integrate a quote into an existing sentence. The first way is to introduce a quote with a complete sentence and a colon. A colon are these 2 little dots. So for instance, Thoreau ends his essay with a metaphor, colon, time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. So you can have a complete sentence, and then that colon is sort of like, bam, here's my message, and then you can put your quote afterwards. You're all probably familiar with using an introductory or explanatory phrase separated by a quote with a comma. So this is what you've probably seen many times before. An introductory phrase such as, according to Thoreau, comma, we do not ride on the railroad, it rides upon us. Or this same format would work for the author writes, comma, or the author says, the author argues. Anytime you have a verbal process introducing a quote, you're going to want to put a comma after that verbal process. You can make a quote a part of the sentence without punctuation, such as the poet argues that shams and delusions are esteemed for soundest truth. So when you have a connector word like that, you don't need to put a comma before it. Finally, you can just integrate a couple words or phrases from a quote. For instance, Thoreau argues that people accept quote-unquote shams and delusions as, quote, the soundest truths. So you can just take a part of a quote and integrate it into a sentence. So in-text citations. Why cite? So in-text citations are important. So, if a reader once was interested in a quote and would like to know where to find that quote, you have documented that. It's also important to cite all sources, including paraphrase sources, ideas, as well as quotes, to avoid accusations of plagiarism. In MLA format, citations always go at the end of the sentence, after the end quote, and before the period. Even if the quote is earlier in the sentence, you still want to put the citation in parentheses as the very last thing before the period. A sentence does not have 2 periods. You want to have only 1 period, and the citation goes right before it. And the format in MLA is just last name and page number in parentheses at the end of a sentence followed by a period. You don't need any comma in between the last name and the page number. If you mention the author's name within the sentence, it does not need to appear in the citation. In that case, you would just include the page number. This is just to avoid redundancy. I'll show you some examples of citations here. For instance, in this first sentence that Thoreau, the author, is being named in this sentence. So all that needs to go in the citation is the page number. And as you can see, it goes at the very end of the sentence, after the close quote, and before the period. Same thing here, the exact same thing. Since the author's last name is mentioned, you do not need to put it in the in-text citation. Here in this one, you do need to put the last name in the citation because the sentence says the poet argues that. So the poet is not named, so you're going to need to put the last name and the page number right before the period. Signal phrases are also important. Signal phrases provide the credentials of an author. Anytime you're introducing a new author in your writing, you're going to want to, anytime you have a new author, you're going to want to introduce them. You want to introduce their credentials. Who are they? Just so your reader might not be familiar with them. Unless it's a big name like Shakespeare or Edgar Allan Poe, your reader might not know who the author is. So it's always good to introduce them. And you can introduce them in a signal phrase. One way of doing it is putting that signal phrase, those credentials, in a non-essential phrase in the middle of a sentence. For instance, Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist, famously said the medium is the message. So you're putting the signal phrase in a non-essential phrase. Non-essential here just means this phrase is not essential to the sentence. You could just as easily have said Marshall McLuhan famously said, but not everyone knows who Marshall McLuhan is, so it would be good to put a signal phrase providing the author's credentials here. And that is one of the easiest ways of doing a signal phrase. Finally, so we've gone through introductions, we've gone through paragraphs, quote integration, in-text citations. Let's get to the conclusion. The conclusion is where you recap. First of all, you want to recap your argument without just literally repeating your argument, but you want to recap for the reader what your argument was all about. This is also a chance to go a bit deeper and allude to a deeper significance. Maybe there was something you couldn't really get to in the paper. You could allude to something a little bit more interesting outside of the scope of your paper here briefly. This is a chance, as before when the introduction was transporting the reader from their lives into your place of analysis, this is your chance to sort of transport the reader from your place of analysis and back into their lives. You want to leave the reader with something sort of thought-provoking to think about. Your teachers will often say, well, what's the so what? In the conclusion, you want to answer the so what question. So what? Why does your argument matter? What is the significance? I've spent the time to read it. Now, what is the real significance of this argument? And again, for introductions, paragraphs, and conclusions, you're going to want at least 5 to 7 well-developed sentences. After you've written your paper, at the top of the next blank page, you're going to put the works cited list. This is a list of your sources cited and arranged in alphabetical order. It's just a place for the reader to refer to your sources that you have cited within the paper. One thing I'll have to show you, and I'll show you in a minute, is how to do a hanging indent. But just remember you continue the double spacing throughout, do not triple space, and it's in alphabetical order with hanging indent, which I'll show you. The most important thing, you don't have to memorize exactly how to do a citation. The most important thing is to identify the type of source that you've been quoting. This could be a book, it could be an article, it could be a website. A lot of times in this course, you're going to be citing a chapter from an anthology. So it's important to know what type of source you're citing. And then it's about referring to a desktop manual or MLA Purdue OWL to see how to cite it. I'm okay with you using citation software like EasyBib. Some professors might not be, but it's also always important to check the citation afterwards to make sure that it is correct, because that software is not always correct, and you will also have to it might not have the source, so then you will have to identify the different parts of the source, such as the publisher, the date, the author, and plug that in. So here's what a works cited list looks like. Remember, the works cited is always at the top of the page, centered. Continue double spacing throughout. It'll be in alphabetical order. And here's the hanging indent, okay? So once a citation goes over its original line, you're going to have to indent each additional line one tab. This might be tricky at first. You might have to hit enter a couple times if you're in Microsoft Word, because it might be auto formatting it to break the formatting, and then hit delete and then bring it back up, and then hopefully it will forget auto formatting and let you do a hanging indent. There are also other ways of doing that by moving the ruler, where it'll also do a hanging indent for you. But as you can see, this is alphabetical order. Hanging indent is just important, I believe, so you can distinguish one citation from another. And I also want to get in very briefly into titles. Different things are styled differently depending on what kind of source you're using. So one way of thinking about this is longer works are usually in italics. Books, names of movies, websites, journals, anthologies are in italics. You italicize them. Short works, such as article titles, poems, songs, and commercials, are in quotes. Okay, so you can also refer to MLA or different resources for this. This is a smaller issue, but just remember longer works like books, movies, websites are in italics, and short works like article titles and poems and commercials are in quotes. Um, Editing and revising. So, first of all, you just want to get a messy draft down. Don't worry too much. It's not going to be perfect. Once you get something down, you can then punch it up and revise it. The best trick I have, the best editing advice I have to give you is to delete all unnecessary words and phrases. Academic writing should be, it's not always, but it should be clear and concise, unlike what you might think. So by just deleting all those unnecessary words and phrases, it makes your writing much more concise, and it also helps with the grammar. You might want to print out your paper by hand and edit it that way. It'll give you a different perspective. Try reading your paper aloud. That will also help you kind of find kind of surface level things and help you with the flow. You might want to get a second opinion from someone else. Hey, what do you think of this paper? You don't want them to rewrite the paper for you, but it's always good to get a different set of eyes. Also, editing is different than revisioning. Editing is kind of more of the surface level things like grammar, spelling, stuff like that. Revision, or as you can see, revisioning, as re-saying, is larger issues of your paper. So maybe you changing a whole thesis or changing a conclusion or getting rid of a paragraph, adding paragraph. About 80% of writing is actually the revision process. So get a draft down early so you can edit and revise. Just briefly, I want to talk about different levels of analysis. You've all heard the term critical analysis before. So we want to do critical analysis in this kind of work, okay? So, and this is called the onion of critical analysis. Each type of analysis feeds off the other. The most basic type of analysis you can do is just describing or reproducing information, basically summarizing, okay? The next level we have analysis, which is reorganizing information. It's about analyzing and finding patterns and relationships and categories. Third, we have persuasion. This is really taking a position and using persuasive sources to, well, persuasively support that position. You want to persuade the reader of your argument. Finally, at the highest level, we have critique. This involves persuasion, but it also involves really critique and transformation, maybe a questioning of the author, questioning things in general, really providing a real critical analysis of something, critiquing so you can transform things to make things better or provide a new perspective. Okay, so all these types of analysis work upon each other. One of the basic points here is we want to get away from just basic description and summary. Here's another way of looking at analysis, like the onion of critical analysis. So at the most basic level, we have just reproducing descriptions, such as quoting without analysis. The next level, we have summarizing description. So this is a little bit more advanced. You're actually summarizing and redescribing information. That's all well and good, but we want to get you to higher levels of analysis, such as really interpreting information, making value judgments about information, drawing larger generalizations and conclusions, and then finally abstraction, being able to really abstract, applying higher level concepts and applying them into different situations, abstracting from just the text you're reading and locating something in a larger sociocultural context. So, summary is always necessary, but it's only necessary really to get to these more important skills of interpretation, persuasion, critique. And finally, anytime you're writing, think about the rhetorical situation. Think about the context with which you're in. Think about what is the purpose of this essay I'm writing. Maybe thinking about the prompt. What is the purpose? What am I trying to achieve? What does the prompt want me to achieve? How am I going to achieve this? Me as a speaker, how will I achieve this? What kind of message do I need to give? Who's my audience? You want to think of the genre. Different genres value different types of language choices. So, for instance, a lot of academic, scientific writing doesn't use very much first person or personal experience. You want to see, is this essay asking for reproducing my personal experience? Or is it really more questioning, thinking, encouraging me to argue for my own perspective or ideas instead of personal experience? while creative writing might highly value personal experience in the first person. So just remember, whatever genre you're working in, whatever the purpose of your essay, um, these things are going to be important, and they will alter the type of language you will be using. It'll alter the type of how you are addressing your audience. So all of these things are important when writing an academic essay. So that is all for today. Thank you for listening.